West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Wherever you may be, here or around the globe, we're delighted to have you with us on this beautiful, warm, sunny morning here in Southeast Scarborough. And a very special warm welcome to our guest speaker this morning, Dr. Mark Reimers. We're most happy to have him back with us again, and we will tell you more about him when we introduce him later in the service. West Hill United is located in Treaty 20 and in the area of the Williams Treaties of 1923. These are the lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and were previously occupied by the Seneca and Huron-Wendat First Nations. I believe that most of us are unaware that the world's approximately 476 million Indigenous peoples make up approximately 6% of the global population, and yet they play a vital role in biodiversity conservation. They manage or hold tenure rights to approximately a quarter of the world's surface area, accounting for a significant portion of the world's biodiversity, nearly half of the Earth's protected areas, and over half of the planet's remaining intact forests that are crucial for sustaining life on Earth. As treaty people, we support the United Nations declarations of the rights of Indigenous people under Section 10 that tells us, Indigenous people shall not be forcibly removed from their lands or territories. No relocation shall take place without the free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous peoples concerned. This declaration provides a roadmap to the advancement of lasting reconciliation with Indigenous peoples worldwide. Speaking of reconciliation, this past Tuesday, Jean Skillman, Kathleen Blakey, Dan Cooperstock, Art Palmatier, Sheila Meyer, Ingrid Scholdice, and myself had a meeting with the local Member of Parliament, Juanita Nathan, who's just over the border in Pickering. We'd requested this meeting because we wanted to raise the concerns that were highlighted in our petition and gain her support in sponsoring it so that it could go forward to Ottawa. The petition must be sponsored by a Member of Parliament. The following is the summary of my memories of that meeting, which I sent out the following day to our group for their feedback because I hadn't taken notes during our hours meeting, and I just wanted to make sure I hadn't forgotten something important. Thanks to each of you for expressing your concerns and for what I believe was a healthy conversation around the issue of the gap in funding water, housing, education, etc. for First Nations. I believe we were heard, and I'm thankful that Ms. Nathan agreed to support the petition. However, at times, on reflection, I felt as if she was blaming the victim. According to her, there is skimming going on within the First Nations by the chiefs. But in turn, we believe that there is also skimming going on within some levels of the bureaucracy and government as well. Just awful, but still, where does that leave the little guy, the women and children? We all wondered, where is the policing and accountability on all sides? There was some talk of how the chiefs live in nice homes while the regular folk abide in crowded or dilapidated lodgings. However, I do wish that I'd had thought to point out that we don't expect the head of our country or our nation, Mark Carney, to live in overcrowded and or broken down housing or in a tent just because there is a lack of inadequate housing for our people. It was noted that the federal government is funding the building of 700 homes in Nunavut. Ms. Nathan had just got back from a trip there where there was also discussion about the building of more schools in the near future. The Inuit would like the education to focus on hunting and fishing, traditional values and skills, while the government would like to see academics and trades be the focus. Perhaps there'll be a compromise, we wondered. Some of us agreed that things could work better overall if all levels of government could be involved to make sure things went according to Hoyle with respect to government funding and how it is dispersed at different levels within government and within First Nations. And Ms. Nathan did take the issue of potable water seriously, offering to check out the discrepancy in the completion rate that the government had put forward, which made us all wonder if things actually been at a standstill over the past 4 years. Interestingly, Ms. Nathan offered to set up a meeting with us, with our group, with one of the 5 Indigenous MPs in Parliament. And of course, we happily agreed to that. And her office has since advised that they expect that'll happen in August, and they'll let us know as early as possible, they said. We're thankful for Steve's letter. He was sorry he couldn't come and support us, but he gave a letter of support, and we provided that and the updated petition to Ms. Nathan. Before the petition can go forward, Ms. Nathan advised that we have to collect 25 signatures, and then we get that to her office, and she will move it forward to Ottawa. I have the petition with me, and I'm hoping that we can collect signatures following the service. It was a good meeting, and I think everyone felt comfortable saying whatever they felt, which was good. Like Kathleen Blakey talked about the fact that there was only about 13 of the 94 calls to action that have been completed to date. So we tried to raise many different issues. Afterwards, she asked for a picture with us, and so and they kindly sent it to us. So I think the group show the picture. It is up? Okay. Oh, great. Oh, it was. Okay, super. Thank you. Okay, pardon? Oh, there we are. Here's the group. We have 4 readings this morning for you. At the end of the readings, we customarily add the phrase, offered as wisdom for the journey, and we invite you to respond with the phrase, may we walk in its light, if you wish to do so. Our first reading is from C.S. Lewis, an influential British author, scholar, and Christian apologist, best known for creating the fantasy series, The Chronicles of Narnia. He was also a prominent Oxford and Cambridge professor and a key member of the Inklings Literacy Circle alongside J.R. Tolkien. Courage is not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. In fact, you would not need courage if you did not have fear. Our second reading is from, I'm not going to say this correctly, Thucydides, an Athenian general and historian who lived around 460 to 400 BC. He is famous for writing the history of the Peloponnesian War, which is a detailed account of the massive conflict between Athens and Sparta. The bravest are surely those who have the clearest vision of what is before them, glory and danger alike, and yet notwithstanding, go out to meet it. Our third reading is from Tao Te Ching. It is a famous ancient Chinese book, not a person. It was written likely around 500 BC. Today it is one of the most translated books in the world and forms the foundation of the philosophy called Taoism. Compassion and love are what enable courage. And our final reading is from Marcus Aurelius, a famous Roman emperor who ruled from 161 to 180 CE. He is known as one of Rome's 5 good emperors and a philosopher king. He led the Roman Empire through wars and a deadly plague while writing a famous book, Meditations, about his personal thoughts. The following is a quote from chapter 7, verse 61 of his book. The art of living is more like wrestling than dancing, insofar as it stands ready against the accidental and the unforeseen. Offered as wisdom for the journey. Walk in its light. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker this morning, Dr. Mark Reimers. Dr. Reimers is a quantitative neuroscientist investigating how the kaleidoscope, ever-shifting activity in your brain gives rise to thoughts and feelings. Dr. Reimers has worked at the U.S. National Institute of Health, the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, the Virginia Institute for Psychiatric and Behavioral Genetics, and at Michigan State University. Dr. Reimers was leader of the Richmond Humanists in Virginia for 5 years and the leader of the Unitarian Universalist Forum in Lansing, Michigan for 6 years. He speaks frequently at humanist and science outreach events in Michigan and online. He aims to weave together brain science with humanist aspirations, and we're delighted to have him back again with us today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Reimers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be back. When Joe asked me to speak on the topic of the brain science of courage, I was a bit taken aback because that's not close to my expertise. But I was glad to have the opportunity to learn about what science can tell us about an important virtue. What I learned was that brain science can tell us a fair bit about fear, but only a little bit about courage. But I'll tell you what we've found so far. So can you see what happened here? Oh, sorry, wrong screen. Let's try that again. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah,
Yes.
but you're doing the overlay with you.
Okay, is that good?
Yeah,
Yes.
but you are overlaid on top of it.
Okay, so let me stop sharing and change the, sorry, we were fooling around earlier. There. Thanks, Aiden. Okay, oh, sorry.
We see your email. Yeah.
Sorry, I got the wrong, keep getting the screens mixed up. Let's try this. Let's try this again. Okay, is that better?
Yeah, and if you hit play, we should be good.
All right, that's great. Sorry about that. I'm going to show you a picture that probably most of you have seen before. And how do you think this man is feeling? Most of you may be able to place this picture. It's the scene in the movie version of To Kill a Mockingbird, when the lawyer Atticus Finch, who is defending a black man unjustly accused of rape, he's defending him and he's confronting the mob that has come to kill his client, and they're willing to kill him to get there. This is such a powerful story because the hero is showing both physical courage in facing down an angry mob and moral courage in defending an unpopular client. So how do you think he's feeling? He's probably sweating, probably a cold sweat. His heart is probably pounding. So how does all this happen? That's where we feel courage. As Joe has told you, the word courage is derived from the Latin word for heart, cor, and that's where we feel fear and also where we feel courage, in the heart and in our guts, even though that's not actually where the action is. The action's in the brain, but we feel courage here in our hearts, in our chest, in our guts, because that's reflecting what's happening in the brain. Interestingly, lots of other cultures don't think courage is in the heart. It's very popular in many cultures to think it's in the liver or in the gallbladder, in Chinese. But it's in our guts somewhere, and even in English we say a brave person has guts. Well, how does this happen? You're all familiar with the nervous system that controls our fingers and our legs and limbs and gives us sensations of touch. But there's a parallel nervous system devoted just to put us quickly into high gear for immediate action. And that first system speeds up our heart, expands the pupils of our eyes to let in more light, opens our pores, and pauses our digestion. It makes us ready to fight or to flee. And this system is called the sympathetic nervous system, and it seems a bit like a confusing name to us because it has nothing to do with what we think of as sympathy. But the word comes from the ancient Greek physician Galen, who noticed how different body organs seem to be interconnected, and they're all activated at the same time when we tune up for action, when we get ready for fight or flight. So he thought that there was a kind of sympathy between the organs, that they could communicate quickly. So your heart would start racing at the same time as your stomach would clench, at the same time as your pores would open, and your eyes would go wide. And in the 18th century, one of the European anatomists, Jacob Winslow, identified the nervous system, this parallel nervous system that connects your brain to all of your organs and brings this about. And he called it the sympathetic nervous system. So that's why we feel it in our heart and our guts, even though the action's happening in the brain. So I want to talk about 4 kinds of things. The first is what happens when we experience fear. What's going on in our brains when we experience fear? And then I want to talk about 3 kinds of courage. And physical courage, of course, is facing a clear and present danger or threat, or doing something that will put us in pain. Moral courage is more bucking the social consensus and risking backlash. And spiritual courage is something we hardly understand at all, but it means to go deeply into facing up to our frailty and failures. So let's start with the biology of fear. Interestingly, in popular culture and in the newspapers, we read that the amygdala is the place where we feel fear and anger. The amygdala is not really uniquely to blame for our bad feelings. It's involved in many other social feelings. Interestingly, in children, in most children, the amygdala is a lot more activated by positive social experience than by fear. And other cultures don't necessarily activate the amygdala to the same extent in fear. So maybe our commonplace thinking that the amygdala is all about fear and anger says maybe something more about our culture than about something about our biology, the way our brains really work. In fact, there's a great deal of other brain regions that are involved in fear. You could say that fear involves a network linking many brain regions across the entire brain. And here I'm showing you a picture of the left side of the brain on the left side of the picture, the right side of the brain in the middle, and then a view as if you had sliced the brain in half along the midline. And what I'm showing you is what brain areas are known to be active in just the immediate experience of fear. And all of those areas in orange are more active. The few areas in blue are less active when we are looking, at the monster in the face, or just, confronting a burning building. Now, in everyday speech, we talk about fear and anxiety as kind of a spectrum. Anxiety may be a weaker form of fear. But in fact, neuroscientists have tried to tease out the difference and find that there's actually a substantially different, some overlaps. Some of these are the same regions I showed you before, but many of them are different. And they've scanned hundreds of people and found that there's this very different signature. But what's really interesting is when you have so many different brain areas, then you can see that different people have different patterns of activation. Some of them activate one area more, some activate another area more. And it turns out that that neuroscientists are now confirming what intuitive people and wise people have known for a long time, that different people experience fear quite differently. Just because I have an experience of fear that's so compelling to me doesn't mean that I know exactly what's going on with you when you experience maybe the same ride or the same horror movie. You may be experiencing something quite different than I do. And I think it's worth keeping that in mind. So how do we overcome fears? What is physical courage? I'm thinking of physical courage as when a person runs toward a burning building to save a child, or runs in this country to a mass shooter to try to stop him. And I want to distinguish physical courage from two kinds of boldness that we are often confused with courage. And the first kind of boldness is fearlessness. Some people just don't feel much fear at all. Some of these people have deficits in their brain. They may have there's a rare disease that really takes out the amygdala selectively. There's other reasons that other people may not experience fear, but they don't have to overcome their fear. They may find it easy to be stuntmen or firefighters. They don't have to muster courage because they don't have much fear to overcome. And then there are other people who do feel fear, but they are willing to take a lot of risks because they really, really want something. They're people we might call reckless. So how do people overcome their fears? So I'm not going to talk about fearlessness. I'm not going to talk about recklessness. I'm going to talk about people like you and me, ordinary people who overcome their fears. So about 10 years ago, some researchers in Israel constructed an artificial situation that required courage. So they brought into the lab a number of people who were terrified of snakes. There's a nice long word for that if you like to impress people at parties, ophidiophobic. Try that on your next cocktail party. So they brought people who were terrified of snakes, and they put them in a brain scanner, and they put a snake on one end of a conveyor belt, and the other end of the conveyor belt ended up just next to the head of the subject in the scanner. Okay, so here you are. The person in the scanner can see the snake. They're terrified of the snake, and they have then the researchers gave the person in the scanner a controller for the conveyor belt. So they could move the snake toward them or away from them. And the scientists asked the people in the scanner to bring the snake as close as they could stand to their own heads in the scanner. And, as they could. And then they observed the brain activity and looked at the regions of the brain that were active just before the subjects made a choice to move the snake toward themselves. And this is what they show in their write-up of their study, is they found consistently just before the people started activating the joystick to move the snake closer, they found more activity in an area that's about 3 inches behind the bridge of your nose. We call it the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. That prefix ventromedial just means the part that's at the midline and close to your belly. So it's just referring to its geography within the prefrontal cortex. Now, the authors of this paper didn't really give much interpretation. They didn't tell you what that meant. They just noticed that this was the area that was most consistently active when people did something courageous. But that's a very important area for human beings. It's an area that mediates close relationships and moral obligations. So if you are thinking about or feeling strongly something about, let's say, someone really close to you, let's say your mother or your wife or your husband, or someone really means a lot to you, that area is very active. If you're thinking about something that you feel obligated to do, maybe you don't want to do. If you're in an ethical dilemma, that area is very active. And one of the unique things about that area is that it sends messages to many other parts of the brain, as I'm showing in the picture on the left. And in particular, it has a lot of projections, sends a lot of messages directly to inhibit the amygdala. And that's something that's unique to human beings. There's very few connections in chimpanzees or gorillas from this area to the amygdala. And interestingly, that seems to be important for how we can overcome our fears and anxieties. Think about the last time you were on an airplane. Most people have some fear of flying, especially some fear of being cooped up in an aluminum tube, but we overcome it and we don't take it out on our neighbors, mostly, with a few exceptions. So that's something that's enabled by this, this awareness of relationships and how it matters to other people. And that's why I selected that quote from the Tao Te Ching, which completely surprised me. I didn't realize it before I was searching, that in fact, even in 500 BC, the Taoists were aware of how important love is for courage and commented on that. I want to switch now to considering moral courage. And here we're talking not about facing some physical danger, pain, or death. We're talking about when you intervene to defend someone, let's say, who's being actively bullied by your tribe, not necessarily other people, although that also takes courage, but especially by your tribe. And you may suffer serious social consequences for standing up for someone who's unpopular. And in particular, you don't have anything to gain. That person can't give you anything. So that's a kind of courage that I think is distinctive from physical courage. But I also would like to distinguish that kind of courage from, again, two other kinds of nonconformity. One is that some people just don't care about how others feel about them. And so that they're not affected by it. They don't have anxiety about it. And then there are people who are trying to get attention or make a statement by being different. And we're talking about courage where you really want to be accepted. You're not trying to make a statement, but you're doing something that you know is going to be unpopular. So let's start first with something that we mostly take for granted that isn't really true. And that is that we like to think we are autonomous beings and that we, say the things that we've always been thinking, and that we, are deeply authentic. We're agents in our own right. However, this is not nearly as true as we would like to believe. Normal, relatively healthy human beings are very susceptible to following fashions and conforming to other people's feelings, especially if they need other people's approval. About 10 years ago, some Russian researchers have found that when they asked people to look at pictures of faces and rate their trustworthiness, then they showed people what other people said about the trustworthiness of their faces. And they found that as soon as you found out that your rating differed from other people's rating, you couldn't help yourself. You had an immediate, very strong reaction. And this is within half a second. And they even had two stages. So on the left, you're seeing an area that I'll come back to in a minute that's active when you notice you're different. And then we have within a split second, like a quarter of a second later, we're seeing activation in both the frontal medial areas and the back that's trying to correct, in most cases, trying to bring your perception into line with other people's. And the people who, by and large, corrected, meaning they came to say what other people were saying. And that's what our social reaction is, despite what we think about ourselves. So what does it take to resist that? You can't help that. That's what everybody experiences. But what happens when you resist that? And there's a researcher named Emily Caspar at Ghent University in Belgium who's been studying moral courage under conditions of intense feeling. That is, where it's going to matter. She goes out to places like Rwanda and Cambodia and finds people who've been in those horrific situations and tries to measure their brain activity. A very unusual line of research. And she's also done a lot of studies with the military and trying to understand when people will resist illegal orders. And as you may know, that's become quite an issue here in the United States. So she finds that when she asks people, puts them in a situation where they're getting orders or social pressure to harm somebody else, to give them an electric shock in this case, that some people resist. Not many, but some people won't do it, even though they're being told by an authority figure to do this. And the people who resist, who don't obey orders to harm others, are typically activating this area, same area we saw just in the last slide, that has the odd name of temporal parietal junction. And that's an area right at the junction of the temporal lobe, which is here along the side, and the parietal lobe, which is sort of the back upper half of your head. And that's an area that integrates lots of different inputs from different brain regions. But what it seems to do is that it seems to give us a sense of what we're doing that's separate, that it destroys our sense of communion. It says we are doing something that isn't what other people are doing. And it means that the brain is working very hard and it's uncomfortable to do this. So this is an area that if it's turned off, gives rise to the feelings of oneness that people on psychedelics experience, or that people singing group chants, even rousing hymns, can experience that feeling of oneness with everyone else. And that means that we're basically shutting off this area, this temporoparietal junction. But when we make a moral decision that cuts against the grain, that disagrees with the orders, especially when we are doing it for empathy, then that region is activated, and it means that we are also experiencing, the discomfort and the loneliness of being separate from the group, being unlike others. So I'd like to end with more a question than a statement. So this is the last kind of courage I wanted to consider is, what does it take to give up the certainty of our preferred narrative and the meaning that it's given our lives? What does it take to say, I've been wrong, maybe for a long time? And what does it take to say, there's something more valuable that I'm going to commit myself to? And at this point, neuroscience really has no answers to this. Nobody's done these kinds of experiments, so I can't tell you. But I'd like us to ask about that, because I think that kind of courage is going to be increasingly important in the days ahead.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.